Alrighty. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell me about your background. How did you start bassoon? What schools did you attend?
Okay, cool. I'm Kayla Bellamy. I am finishing up my fifth year. I had to count it up. My fifth year teaching at the University of Northern Iowa. That was my first job out of my doctorate. So I've been there kind of to start my higher ed career, basically. But I'm mostly from the Atlanta area. From middle school through kind of my master's degree. I was just outside of Atlanta and in Athens. I went to public school, middle and high school in Forsyth County, just north of Atlanta, about 45 minutes or so. And then I did my undergraduate in music education at University of Georgia. And
Go
I taught,
dogs.
yeah, go dogs. And I taught middle school band after that. Actually, I was a middle school band director in Gwinnett County for a year and worked with the Emory Youth Symphony on their conducting faculty for a few years. And that was the transition time between teachers at UGA. My undergrad was with Bill Davis, and then I did my master's with Amy Pollard when she started there. So it was her second year, I think was the first year of my master's. And then went and climbed mountains for a summer at Aspen and played some bassoon out there. And then I went and did my doctorate at Indiana University, primarily in Bill Ludwig's studio. And I was actually only in residence there for 2 years. The third year of my coursework and degree overlapped with my first year at Northern Iowa. So I moved a little bit further out west and have been teaching there since.
Wow, that's fantastic. Wow. So, for all those who are listening, who want to pursue a similar career path or maybe um, on their way to doing so, how would you define success, and what sort of things have you experienced in your career that you think have led you to the success that you've achieved?
Yeah, I was trying to think through this. Like I know I'm very glad that you sent some ideas kind of before we talked because
Yeah.
sometimes they're difficult questions.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think success, we often fall into the trap with success of thinking that you have to have something concrete to show for what you have done. So we think of this sort of like input output model. I've put in all of this time, I've put in all of this practice, and therefore I win the audition, or therefore I get the degree, or whatever we consider that to be a success. But I think ultimately my my view of success is broader than that, and my approach in any situation, whether it's musical or specifically pedagogical, is just to leave everything better than I found it.
Yeah.
And that can take many forms. And I think having flexibility and a broad definition for what you're willing to consider to be successful, not only is just a better place from like a mental health perspective, right? You're able to stay north of center, you know, in terms of your outlook on things. Um, but it creates a lot of opportunities to redefine success along the way. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the ways that we kind of get ourselves in traps as musicians and as scholars pursuing careers in academia is it can be very easy to think only about the rubric or only about the checklist and that there's one path if I want to be a college music professor. The way
Right.
that I do it is I get the undergraduate in performance and then I go straight to my master's and then I have to go somewhere where I get a TA position. Otherwise, how am I going to have teaching experience? And it that's a very narrow definition, I think,
Right.
of success and of a trajectory. And so
Yeah.
that's something that's a little more like no matter what situation you're presented with, if you go in and make sure that you leave that situation with being able to identify something that you have made yourself better through it and that you leave everywhere a little bit cleaner and a little bit further along than when you went into that, then I think we all come out more successful at the end.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you. And success looks different for everyone, right? It's
Yeah,
interesting.
for
Yeah,
sure.
sure. So, you've had a very sort of diverse career teaching and working with band and bassoons, other bassoon students. So, what have you learned about yourself throughout your career?
Ooh, learned about myself. um, I I feel like I'm learning something new every day. Every time I sit
Right.
down, you know, in a practice room or try to work on something, there's something new that I'm learning. Um, but one thing that I've really been trying to focus on lately is this idea of arrival.
Hmm.
That, and this kind of goes back to the idea of success, right? That there's not really a moment when all of a sudden you feel like you've made it.
Right.
And that what I've found about myself is that there are I can make things happen if I'm willing to kind of take a roundabout way
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. And I know, like, if we're going specifically with career trajectory, I suspected, I didn't really know, but I thought that I would be interested in teaching at the college level, kind of toward the end of undergraduate. At that point, I thought it would be in the realm of conducting. I thought I wanted to go and study conducting and do like large ensembles at a college level. Um, and I through really only self-reflection realized that the reason that I thought I wanted to do that was not had very little to do with that actual job and more about the kind of relationships that I wanted to build and the kind of role that I wanted to be able to play in other people's, career paths and lives. And the ability to do that is not something that actually had to come with time. It's something that's always sort of been there in each aspect of my career that I've done so far. And so this kind of concept of just being enough, I think is relatively recent for me, but it's really empowering to
Right. Right.
you're not waiting for something else to happen or for the day when all of a sudden you're good enough or smart enough or strong enough or have enough degrees or that you already are enough for the situations and the opportunities that are presented to you.
That's really beautiful. And I think something a lot of musicians need to hear because we tend to wrap so much of our definition of ourselves into our success as musicians.
Yeah.
So for those of us who are people are trying to get jobs and sort of frustrated with auditions right now and just experiencing an utter sort of sense of loss and like being lost right now in the field, what would you say to people? How do you view competition in the field? Because music is a very competitive field, and how would you view that?
It's tough.
Right.
And I know that we're not alone in terms of our field being a really competitive field. There's a lot of competition in a lot of different areas.
Right.
And something that I really have to convince myself of many times when I'm in something that would normally be considered, from an external view, a really competitive environment, is that the vast majority of the time, whether you're talking about an audition or kind of an interview process for a job, everybody is looking for the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's looking for the right fit, and redefining both competition and failure.
Yeah.
Through that perspective can be really healthy. It obviously is easier to do if you get the job.
Right. Right.
And it's a really tough pill to swallow, to look at, when you're looking at other people around you who would be your competition, for lack of a better description, and think that maybe that is the right fit. Maybe the right fit is not me, or maybe my right fit is somewhere else.
Right.
Having everybody's, I'm a pretty firm believer in the floofy term of everything for a reason.
Right.
I really do believe that everybody ends up where they're supposed to end up, and most of the time we can't see that when we're the one going through it. It's only after it's already happened. And I have very few instances, either of success or failure, that I can think of in my career, because I've got a number of failures also.
Right.
Or I can look back and think, that really, if I'm really truly honest with myself, that should have been me.
Right.
Most of the time, I still have faith that it works out. You're like, okay, that person really is great and great for that organization. And I ended up here, and that's not even remotely what I thought I was going to be doing. Mm-hmm. But that's where I was supposed to end up. My first round of graduate auditions after undergrad, I did not get accepted to a single school. Which was really tough at the time.
Yeah.
And even to the point I went to, this was for, I didn't audition anywhere on bassoon. This was when I thought I wanted to go into the conducting realm, kind of primarily.
Right.
Asking mentors in that field for advice and going to workshops and things, and literally getting laughed at was really tough. And at that age, and at that time in my life, hearing, well, you're gonna end up where you're supposed to be, right? That's something that feels very like my mom says that.
Right, right.
And when you're going through the failure side of it, it doesn't feel helpful.
Right.
But at least for what it's worth, vouching on the other side of it,
Right.
on the other side of some parts of it, I'm certainly not done with all of the successes and failures that I'm going to run into.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That was, I think, something that a lot of us have experienced with and struggled with. So another challenging question. If you could change anything about the arts industry, what would it be?
About the arts, and do you mean anything about kind of how it functions, or just anything related to the arts world?
Well, this question is courtesy of Dr. Schillinger, but I think she means anything about the music and arts world as a whole, whether it be
Okay.
the orchestral industry or even performing arts or academia,
Yeah.
sort of a large scope.
Yeah. Really, I've been thinking about this a lot, and that since we're on this shelter in place, stay at home order, since we're all in a very different place of interacting with each other and interacting with our art, and artists interacting with each other and the general population, that there are so many people right now who don't consider themselves musicians or artists that are relying on art
Hmm.
to help them through a really tough time. And they'll say that anyway. People will say that anytime you walk up on the street. I'm convinced. I've said this as sort of the answer to various other questions before too. If you ask somebody, what are your three favorite things in the world? Almost always somebody's going to have an art in one of those three.
Right.
Like they're going to have a person, they might have an activity, and they're probably going to have some sort of art form.
Hmm.
And everybody loves music.
Right.
I don't know a single person, and I don't know anybody that knows anybody that says I hate music, like all
Right.
music.
Right.
And this is a long way of answering this question, but if I could change one thing about the arts world, I would change how we value that in society.
Hmm.
And not even that we place more value, but that we accept how important it is and um, prioritize things like our legislation and the way that we support organizations based on that level of value that humans are putting intrinsically in art forms. We don't there's a real mismatch with how that's supported as an industry,
Right.
from just like a purely capitalist sort of lens. It's
Right.
not there's something that doesn't fit.
Right. I absolutely agree. Yes. It will be interesting to see. A lot of arts organizations are unfortunately struggling during this
Mhm.
time now that the quarantine has taken away audiences and sources of
But
profit.
it has taken away audiences, but it has also drastically increased audiences.
That's true.
The amount of art that people in our country are consuming right now is insane.
Right. Right.
Assuming that I mean, this is all assuming that you're willing to throw
Right.
Netflix in the same bucket as, Chicago Symphony, as, the Met, as, um, and I think if we're looking, considering music and art to be that broad of a lens, film and television, and those are all art forms, and we can't get enough of that now,
Right.
whether it's as a form of escapism or a way of expressing. Um, I don't know. I would love to see the data on how much the acapella subscriptions have skyrocketed.
Oh. Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
have
So
yet
many
to pay
people.
for it. I'm still like sneaking by with the free version.
Me too. Me too. Side question, but what songs and things have you been recording on your a cappella app? Anything?
Oh,
Um,
so before quarantine times, from
right.
like a new like BC BQ, before quarantine, I was recording mostly arrangements, like trio and quartet arrangements that I used teaching.
Oh
So
wow, that sounds
that our student ensemble would play, or I mostly released one after we would do like an all-state workshop, where I did a bassoon day and would do a choir reading of something. And
right.
it was
Right.
my, now that you've met me, now we've played this, find our studio Instagram and I'll post the recording of this. And so it was things like I've got a quartet arrangement of the Cantina Band from Star Wars, like a lot of Disney tunes, that sort of just like the fun stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Some of the classic bassoon quartets,
Yeah.
Eisenhorn trios, but mid-quarantine, I started, oh gosh, was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, on a kick of recording single minute, like minute or less clips of any song that has to do with home or stay in the
That's really
chorus
cool.
of the title.
Yeah.
And I started running out of ideas. Like, well, I mean, it wasn't getting hard, but it was getting where I had to think about it after the first like 4 or 5 when it comes to mine. And fortunately, at that point, I had a colleague of mine in the theater department said, "Oh, can you record Bring Him Home from Les Mis?" I was like, "Perfect. Now I don't have to research. I just I just have to go make the arrangement."
What a
Um,
cool project. That's fun. That's really fun.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. So if anybody has any, songs about
Yeah.
staying, or I'm also thinking about folding in Alone, but the problem is it's not really alone. I don't know if that's something that I really want to like promote, is this idea of, and all songs that say alone are generally pretty sad.
Right. Right. Well,
So,
for those that are watching, if you have an idea or suggestion, you can type in the comments. But anyway, so a lot of our audience will probably be, and the goal of this project, this interview project, is to sort of match students with professionals that are, sort of in the field that they are aspiring to
mhm.
be in one day. So for all of our students watching, um, what is one thing that you wish was a larger part of your music curriculum studies when you were going through school, or even now in your own teaching with your own students?
Oh yeah.
Anything
I
you've
think,
observed?
yeah, I think sometimes those are the same question and sometimes they're not.
Right, right.
I still stand by my immediate observation when I was in the program. I had my suspicions that I was not good enough at the piano. Because I'm not very good at the piano.
Neither am I.
But I don't know, and the reason for that, the reason for wanting and wishing I had more of that has changed as I've gone through the career. Like I immediately thought I'm surely not good enough to like ever play anything. Like I couldn't accompany a choir or something. I mean, I could do like like I was pretty good at that part, but I didn't feel like I was functional
Right.
in the setting that I envisioned myself in.
Hmm.
Um, from like a repertoire standpoint, just the ability to sit down and read. And the more that I get into my career now, the less that I feel like I would use that specifically. I
Hmm.
don't feel really compelled to get up and like accompany my students in on their solo rep, for example.
Right.
But I do wish that I had more like functional chord progression development. And so I'm supplementing that on my own, but that's something that I would use regularly, just for anytime you're doing intonation studies, or I do quite a bit of drone work with like an obnoxiously loud speaker, and it's really nice to also have some harmonic underpinning in addition to just sort of your tonic or your whatever your root is that you're droning.
Right.
So just having the ability to look at something and know and harmonize at sight, which I can do theoretically. I feel like the theory background of most music majors is pretty solid.
Hmm.
But the ability to turn that into music, whether that's on the piano or on your instrument, that's
Right.
something that I see now with my current students that I wish was emphasized more, is the use of primary instrument in a theoretical or even a historical context. There's I feel like we are, at least now I work with a student body, and I get the impression that it's sort of generational. That the connections need to be pretty explicit from one discipline to another discipline, and that so having participation on a primary instrument when you're talking about the Baroque era, and here's the kinds of things that we did, and so compositionally here's what music looked like at this time. Now actually literally take out your instrument and look at the way that you're playing embellishments in this. I think the connection to producing music
Hmm.
with the theoretical, we're getting better about going the other way around, right? You're playing the Mozart concerto, so look up some stuff about Mozart and like read all these programs and analyze it. But if you actually had to like take your bassoon to theory class, when you were doing Schenkerian analysis and reduce your own baseline and perform along with something, like that would be super actually useful to make those connections.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't recall an instance in any of my theory classes that I've been asked to do that. So
Yeah,
that would,
it would
that,
actually, I mean, as a side note, it would make all of these quartet like chamber music projects so much easier because you actually could play by ear
right.
instead of having to do quite so much like hardcore cognitive ear training on paper work.
Absolutely. Yeah. So not only are a lot of our audience members students, but a lot of them are females. And the goal of this channel is to sort of empower women, female bassoonists, even other female musicians. And it's all very, very inspiring. But one of the questions that I was wondering is, have you encountered any sexism in your line of work, and how have you dealt with that? Because I think that's for a lot of, whether we're students or professionals, I think that's maybe a universal experience for women, and it would be nice to hear some insights from you.
Yeah, I don't think any of us haven't
Right.
encountered in some form. I mean, some have been in situations that are much more overt
Right.
or more aggressive than others. But I don't think we're not at a point within a society where anyone can really truly say that they have not encountered sexism.
Right.
My responses to different situations that I've been in has has varied pretty widely. Some of them I am proud of, some of them I'm ashamed by, and not as I expected to be, with sort of the level of not really aggression, but the level of strength
Right.
with which I responded. That's sort of what I would have imagined being kind of shying away from.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a person to shy away by nature, but
Right.
I'm definitely of the break down the rebel or take the rebellion from the inside. Right, you join the system, infiltrate,
Right.
and then tear it down from the inside. That's kind of my mode of operation, and as a result of that, I think my responses to some offensive situations have not been as clear or as strong. I've been pretty willing in the past, especially just to let things slide and accept them as a reality, and that's something that I'm still being very mindful to not do.
Right.
I think it's very important for us to, anytime it's acknowledged, sometimes we literally don't even see it. You
Right.
don't see it happening until someone else points out to you, or until never, right? Sometimes you just never notice
Mm-hmm.
that has happened until you see it happen to someone else, and you're able to see, some of those other things. But trying not to ignore small comments just because they're small comments. The world, especially in the arts world, we tend to see sexism more in the form of microaggressions
Mm-hmm.
than big, very offensive kind of splashy headline
Mm-hmm.
things. So for me, that's really taken the form of asking clarifying questions when questionable comments are made. I've had a nameless colleague who, as an example, at one point in fairly recent history, was pretty critical of some productivity that I'd been having, and just right in the middle of our workplace, looked at me and just said, "Well, why don't you just go have a baby?"
Mm.
And that's something that I would have, yeah, I know, and it's
Uh,
all of the other like horrible implications aside about family decisions, and there are many layers to why this was a problem, but that's an example of a kind of comment that I think we, particularly as young female professionals, have been both just sort of subliminally trained to, subconsciously trained, and also explicitly told, well, that person's going to leave soon, or they don't know what they're talking about, or oh, just ignore it, I'm sure she didn't mean that. And it's not always the scenario that we imagine when we think of like, how have you encountered sexism? That's the sort of like young female and older male, really aggressive, like verbal comments or for physical contact or anything. It doesn't have to be kind of that format. And if it's, we often, I think, fall into the trap of if it's not something that we would consider to be like a reportable offense. If it's a colleague going to an HR, if it's a student, you feel like you need to report it, or if a student told you that this happened, should I report it to my supervisor? If it's not at the level of that action, then we sort of file it away as nothing. Yeah. And having this mindset of all or nothing in terms of appropriate and inappropriate interactions is, I think, what continues to propagate the issues that we're having. So with this particular colleague, and a lot of times it doesn't come from a malicious place. Mm-hmm. And so I actually looked at this colleague and I said, oh, well, what do you mean by that? And she sort of looked like floored a little bit. She's like, oh, I just mean that, you can't be as productive. You can't be as productive when you have a busy home life. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And it only took a couple questions like that before, there was, oh, I need to go get some lunch. and it was very quickly dropped.
Right.
Yeah, there are some really unfortunate circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Right.
I think being willing to just acknowledge that it's happening. It takes a lot more courage than we think it does.
Right.
Even just to say something at all, to tell somebody like, hey, this guy's like kind of looked at me longer than I think he looked at everybody else. Mm-hmm. Or did you notice that everybody that advanced past that first interview were all white guys? Right. And it takes a base level of courage even just to acknowledge it, let alone propose a solution or try to do anything about it. So right. I do think we still unfortunately have some problems,
right,
in our field, but in our society as a whole.
Yeah. So what would be your one piece of advice for any student or professional going through any sort of discrimination at this point in their education or workplace or whatnot?
I wish that I had like some really nice insightful feel good advice, but literally the best piece of advice I can think for is write everything down. Mm-hmm. Have everything written down, as much communication as you can have that's like in a written format, that's something that's documented. That's one of the first things that we teach and learn in kind of tricky situations and teacher training, is you document everything. And I think from on the slightly lighter side of it, one of the nice things about that is that you can start to see, this is how I noticed the trends in my own response. It's even just like I had it in a notes app on my phone. Not because I wanted a documentation to be able to send to my supervisor or something, just because I wanted to like write it down because I felt like it was happening all the time. Mm-hmm. And then I thought about it, I was like, well, it's not actually happening ever. It only happened twice. Why do I didn't have a good grasp on frequency or intensity in my own reaction to it. So I literally just started journaling, like, so-and-so said this again today. And then I could go back and see, okay, it literally does happen every week. And every week I got angry, or this has been happening for 6 months and I've never even told her that it makes me uncomfortable. So just having some sort of way of objectifying the actions and writing down, like actually keeping a journal of how you're feeling about the things, makes it so much easier to in retrospect, to make a decision of what to do in regards to that specific situation, but to better inform you of how you might want to act moving forward.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you for addressing that. Kind of a hard thing to talk about as well, but I'm glad that we have this community of bassoonists, female bassoonists, willing to inspire each other and support each other. It's really uplifting.
Yeah. I'm actually really glad that came up, not because it's my favorite thing in the world to talk about, but I think it's really easy when we see these kinds of interview projects to think, and the organization that we know, with the group that we know of, is so supportive.
Absolutely.
And it's really easy to see things like this and think, oh, this is going to be great, and a video that's going to make me feel good, but it's sort of like fluffy. and is it's still important for us to do the things that aren't fluffy too.
Right, right. So, sort of bouncing back into the bassoon specific realm, I know there's not a lot of time in the day by the time we are done practicing and making reeds and all that sort of thing. But I'm wondering how you balance sort of your work and home life, and what sort of activities you like to do to sort of decompress and de-stress away from the bassoon. Yeah.
I live by my calendar.
Right.
I am super type A in regards to that. I have like a separate little color coded Google Calendar and everything that's pink. Pink is my bassoon color right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything that's pink is like that's my practice block. And I'm pretty clear with myself in terms of designating what's going to be practice time versus reed making time. I think that's one of our big productivity traps as bassoonists. Is we think we're practicing, then you sit down and you kind of start scraping, and then you play like, oh, but this reed is bad, and then now I'm going to work on reeds, but then you also sort of just like play some excerpts, or we don't actually.
So relatable, yes.
And we don't ever like get anything done because you're just like kind of working on reeds, but kind of playing, but kind of watching Netflix, and that's like, and then 3 hours later you don't know what happened. Yeah.
Had many of those afternoons, yes.
I think a lot of us are having that now with quarantine time.
Oh yeah.
For a time, we don't feel like it needs to be as structured, maybe because there aren't as many places that we have to go or be. But I have like the block designated amounts of time for everything, and that I got much better at that the year. Like I've tried to do it, and I was pretty bad at it until I had to do it. The year that I was finishing my doctorate, so I was finishing coursework in fall semester, and I had all of the written exams, and my dissertation defense was all the same academic year as my first year teaching college. And so I was living in about 8 hours away from having to drive back and take the exams, and there were not enough hours in the day. And so this process for me started when I had to do that much travel, that I knew it took me 8 hours to get from Cedar Falls to Bloomington, and so I block out 8 hours, and I could shift that around. I knew if it's going to take me that long, because I still teach my class at 8 a.m. because I can't skip 2 classes. So I'm going to teach 8 a.m. If I leave at 9, then I get there by here, and then it's going to take me an hour to work on my reeds because it's a slightly different there. And just having these like drag and drop boxes.
Right.
And I think figuring out where the boxes go sometimes is done for you. You have classes that meet at a certain time. And then the second round of boxes that goes, and I actually do this with my students every beginning of every semester. So you put in the things that you can't change, where the times are. And then you put in the things, it's that old story of the glass jar with like the big rocks and then the pebbles and the sand. So then put your big rocks in. What are the next things that are non-negotiable that you have to do? And I include in this, like, you have to sleep every night.
Right.
It doesn't have to be 10 hours. It'd be great if we all had that luxury, but you have to sleep. And this is a hard line that I've gone up with students where I was like, you have to find at least 6. I said, that's still even not enough. You need to find 8. But if you cannot, it has, like, that block has to be at least 6 continuous. And so you put that big rock in. And now please put in 3 meals. They can be 30 minutes long, but make sure, where are you going to eat? Put those in. And where are you, what's next for you? I have a number of students right now, just in our particular situation, that they have to work a certain number of hours in order to be able to pay tuition. Mm-hmm. So they know they have to work 15 hours. I'm like, okay, where does your manager say you have to work? Where do you have some flexibility? Put your work time in there. Then you just start filling, what's the pebbles? And unfortunately, we get to a point where you realize some things are sand that you don't want to be sand.
Right.
And some things are rocks that we don't want them to be rocks.
Right.
So making those priorities is where it gets really tricky, because sometimes there isn't enough time to fit everything in there. I found that I personally have gotten a lot more efficient with my practice. Mm-hmm. Just by virtue of having a set to-do list. I know exactly what I'm going to practice every day, and I'm willing to accept what is the sand, even in practicing.
Right.
In an ideal world, if I had the same 6 hours a day that I had when I was in grad school, sure, that's great. Like, let's do all of this. But if I've got a 40-hour a week teaching job, and then the year that I had also grad school on top of that, it's like, what am I going to practice? What do I have to practice? What do I have to get done? If I've only got 30 minutes, I'm only going to do long tones,
Right,
and some scales, and just cross my fingers and hope everything transfers, for a couple days.
right, right.
But I use a calendar, which is like kind of silly. It seems like silly throwaway advice, but I'm completely dedicated to my calendar. And then when it's not like bassoon and work things, it wasn't until I finished grad school that I started getting really into biking and running.
Mm-hmm.
And I race at the amateur level. I race triathlons when I'm able to get to a swimming pool, be in groups of larger than 50 people.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting. I'm supposed to race at the North American Championships for the half Ironman distance in June, and it hasn't been canceled yet, but it's got to be.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine that's going to happen. So that's really hard to stay motivated to train for something when it's like probably not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I do sort of not super long distance, but like middle long distance, a lot of running and biking, half marathons, that sort of thing. And that's something that I schedule just as diligently. My run is this evening. We have a local run club that runs at 6 p.m. on Thursdays. We're not meeting in person, but 6 p.m. on Thursdays is when I run.
That's great. Yeah.
But I'm also the kind of person that finds a lot of comfort in a schedule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Has it been hard to keep a routine and stay scheduled at this time? It
doesn't feel confining to me. It feels comforting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's good advice, and great advice for those of us who are students. It's always, I think half of college is learning how to time manage and how to have efficient practice sessions and that sort of thing. So that's really, I think, a effective exercise that you have with your students, figuring out the rocks in the sand and.
Well, and don't forget transition times. That's the number one thing people forget. Like, you can't actually practice until 2 if you have class at 2.
Right. Things that everyone forgets, yes.
Right. Like, we can't just teleport. It's not like Zoom classrooms. Actually, I feel like people are getting more done in that sense because you're not actually walking from one room to the next. You just kind of toggle. Right.
Well, you've worked with some fantastic teachers. Got to say a shout out to Dr. Pollard. But as a UGA, I'm also a student. But so you've worked with some fantastic teachers and had a number of fun collaborative projects. But if you could collaborate with anyone in the future on a musical project, absolutely anyone, who would you most like to collaborate with?
Oh, I completely forgot that this thing.
You can pick a few people if you have a couple of options.
Well, I actually really would like to do collaborations just through this group, whether it's virtually or in person. I would love to see us do more during this time specifically, like in the near future. Do this kind of situation, but with like virtual chamber music and something with real people.
Yeah.
But I just really enjoy collaborating with my students at the time, actually.
Yeah.
But I could go through and list all sorts of great musicians from all of history wanting to collaborate with, but I always find that I more want to collaborate with, and I get more fulfillment out of working with people that I also feel like I know as people.
Yeah.
And so while it would be a really nice thing to, work with some of the greatest bassoonists of all time, I certainly wouldn't turn it down if somebody... Right. But I would rather play with my friends.
Yeah.
And with people that I think are just fascinating people that I don't know all that well yet. And a lot of the women that are in this particular group are very firmly in that category for me. They seem just like really fascinating people, and I think that's one of the ways that we get to know each other really well.
Absolutely.
And it's by playing together.
Yeah. I think that's been one of the hardest things for me at this time is that I have not been able to play music with my colleagues at UGA and other people. But so the virtual chamber music projects, I've seen a couple of them floating around the internet already, but we should definitely have more of those. That would be a lot of fun. So So in the last, I have two more questions. I appreciate you answering all of these,
Oh
but
yeah.
sort of a fun question. If you could be someone else for a day, who would you be and why?
I could be someone else for a day. I think I'd be my dog. Is that weird?
No,
Like
that's that's a great answer.
she just seems to love everything and like kind of naps, but everything is exciting.
Oh yeah,
Everything is exciting, and she's either happy or eating or asleep, and I think that sounds like a great day.
that really does. I've said that before. I would love to be one of my pets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd want to be my cat. She seems like pretty angry all the time. But she's always hungry, and I don't need any more of that in my life. But yeah, constantly happy or sleeping or like running in circles sounds pretty great.
Right. Definitely. Definitely. So to wrap up, what is one thing you hope others will gain from listening to you today?
Originally, when I thought through this, I was like, well, I hope it's at least kind of entertaining. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're talking for like 5 minutes about sexism. Like, this is not very entertaining. But I think ultimately this whole series and this specific sort of episode, I hope that people take away um, the fact that there's not one path to get somewhere, and that where you think you want to be and where you're headed might not be the same place, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really insightful. And that path will probably change too,
Yeah.
as you move along. So, well, it has been so fun to talk to you today, and I so wish we could, meet in person at this time. But this is thank goodness for Zoom, right, and
Right.
technology for making these possibilities.
I'm
Uh,
so glad the Zoom platform hasn't just
I know,
collapsed.
crashed on us. I've had a couple of times where I've been in class or something. It has totally crashed. But I hope we can collaborate together sometime in the future. It's also nice to meet
Yeah,
another UGA alum, and
for sure.
look forward to seeing you hopefully maybe at an IDRS conference one of these
Yeah,
days.
the big shebang next year in Boulder.
I know. It's just so disappointing we had to cancel this year's conference. The hosts have been putting a lot of work
Putting in
into
a
it.
lot of work, and
I
it would have been lovely. That's right up the street from where
right,
I am
right.
now, and it would have been really great. And I know that Ben and Courtney have just done a fabulous job, both getting everything put together and then having to deal with getting it together. Um,
Right, right. I hear there might be word around the street is that there might be some sort of online
yeah,
interactive.
there's been some sort of feeler sent out about to people that were going to perform or present this
Right,
year. So I was actually set to give two separate chamber recitals this summer, and so we might do some sort of virtual performances. And I know they've definitely extended at least a day next year,
hmm.
so we'll just make a nice long party out of it.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds great. I hope to be able to make it to that conference, and
Yeah,
hopefully they'll be able to extend your performance to that concert as well, or
yeah,
conference as well. Yeah,
yeah. Hoping so, or something else, or
something
whatever
else. Yeah,
happens
yeah,
at the time. Yeah, I'm glad to. It's just that's a really nice opportunity to see everybody face to face, but to have
yeah,
those
yeah,
personal interactions is great.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, and hopefully we can all. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for sharing your insights and answering my questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause the
Great. Thank you.
recording here.